Good morning and welcome. Welcome to each and everyone. Everyone in Gauteng, I know you guys are freezing. I hope you are nice and warm. Please drop a chat in the chat at the bottom. Tell us where you're from. Val, Ria, Jennifer. I say we've got 35 registered attendees this morning. We're just waiting for them to come. But we all know things happen, load shedding, a lot of things. At the bottom of your screen, there is a reaction button. So please, in the interim, while we wait for a couple of minutes for come, here's a cup of coffee for each and every one. I hope that you are nice and warm. And as you know me, I love to cater. So here's a donut for each and every one. Oh, thank you. Well, I knew you're going to like the coffee or the donuts. That's amazing. We have a very good session this morning, one that we really, I think sometimes need, and we have to be in touch of what is happening around us. So those who don't know me, my name is Elise Leroux, and I'm the Managing Director of Xpello. And what we do at Xpello is we always try to train and give information to our rental agents. I think that is super important. Things continue to change, and we need to know what's happening. We need to stay on top of it. And I always believe, although I was an attorney practicing in evictions for a long period, I know you need to speak to the people that's actually dealing with this stuff. And that's why I'm super excited to have Shaun Luyt joining me today for the training, well, for the webinar this morning. Everybody knows him from his absolute amazing Rentalsphere trainings, and we've done quite a couple of boot camps together. And even though I've done quite a couple of boot camps with Shaun, I always learn something new. And I think that is so valuable. I think you have to, just because you're in the industry for 10, 20 years, you can still learn new stuff. So that's quite exciting. Before we start with this morning session, looking at vetting and what it entails, I think that is the very important part today, is to say what is happening and how do we deal with vetting. A lot of people actually come to us and say, Elise, but vetting, how do we do this? What we check. And I also think because Xpello refers to and have to look at the documents, it has an impact. So that's why we are going to have a look at a vetting session, and it's not going to be a formal training. Not at all. I think it's going to be an information session that we can touch up on a couple of things. So while there's still a couple of people joining us in the chat, please tell us where you're from. Did you experience the snow? I mean, snow is amazing. I'm so sad. I mean, finally it snows in Gauteng and I'm in KZN. I mean, why will that happen to me? Waiting all my life and it snows at home and I'm not there. So I hope somebody experienced the snow. In the chat, please let us know. Did you experience the snow? Or give me a thumbs up. At the bottom, there's a emoji that you can use. Oh, Val, you like me, we missed it, hey? I was very sad. When I saw this, me and my kids wanted to start crying. We felt like that little emoji there. We were quite sad. Ah, Rachel, you got some snow. Oh, lovely and cold. But then you can snow and you can play in the snow, you can drink coffee. I mean, that's like the ultimate goodness. While we're still also waiting, we're going to give it another 3 minutes for people to start joining. Is this month, next week is a huge week with Xpello. Guys, I am so excited. I can't wait. We're going to definitely drink a lot of energy drinks. This should be full of energy. So what's happening next week? Next week, Tuesday, is Mandela Day. So those people in Gauteng that doesn't have anything planned, please come and join us. We have the Mandela Day event. You bring some ingredients, rice, soups, and so forth. And you can spend an hour and you come help us fill the bottles with the foods, and then you eat the pannekoek, because Xpello will sponsor each and every one that arrives by following this link with a pannekoek. It's not a pancake, because the Afrikaanse tannies, they make pannekoek, eh? So I think it's a very good course, 30 minutes. We are also going to market the businesses. So I'm already going to say, Carol, the people from Rawson's Paulsoft, I mean, they jumped in. They didn't even think twice. So thank you to Rawson's Paulsoft coming all the way to Witbergie to come and join us for an hour a day. That's absolutely amazing. So please, anyone else come. We really will go and brag about your companies, give you as much possible marketing to make sure that you can come and enjoy the day. Then the people in the East Rand, just to show you that we do love you. We have an event on the 19th of July in Edenvale. It's a half-day training. It's about Xpello. It's about the services. We have exciting new stuff. We are offering Xpello to tenants to pay. And on the day, we actually explain to you why the tenants will pay. We show you how to offer it to them. So that's quite amazing. So that's also something that comes up. And I really want you guys, if you're in the Edenvale, please fill in the link, reserve your space. The space is getting quite full. And of course, we want to make sure that we have enough coffee and tea that you can join us on the day. If you're not sure about anything on the July event, you're welcome to phone the office and speak to Lizanne. She's my power lady on the July, the Edenvale event. So she will definitely be able to help you if you want to maybe reserve for a couple of people once. So please speak to Lizanne at the office if you need that. So those two things are super exciting. We are started, I should have actually only started recording now, but the session is recorded. I am going to make it a bit smaller and then we will share it, that you can always come back to it. Now, when one speak about vetting, I think is almost the beginning of all things. If you talk about rentals and rental leasing, and I think everybody always said that if you do proper vetting, you are preventing a lot of future frustrations and possible problems. Now, we know that that you can do all the vetting possible and things can still go wrong. And that's why we have Xpello, because anything can happen in the future. But what we've learned is that we have to look at different things different ways. Now, I just want to use this section before we start with the whole vetting process to let you know that Xpello do not do vetting. We are not going to do your vetting for you, okay? And the reason for this is you guys are the experts. We rely on your vetting. However, we do have our checks and balances as well. And throughout, we always go and have a look at certain things on a credit report when we have a look at the vetting, when we get the applications. Because as you know, to apply for Xpello services, if it's a new lease, we need the credit report and we need the lease agreement. So the credit report is very informative. You get different types of reports. The TPN one sort of combines all the information, but all credit reports aren't complete. I mean, sometimes the information is incorrect. People can go and change information on a credit report. So one cannot just use the credit report as the beginning and the end. And I think sometimes that is why I say vetting starts when you meet your tenant. And that is the assessment of the actual tenant. And I'm going to take this juncture. I'm going to have poor Shaun. I know he's a very busy man, and I'm very privileged to have him to join me today. So I can call him in. So just to formally introduce, to say Shaun Luyt, he's the property guru. I know he likes the word guru. He has lots of experience doing rental managements, vettings. He's been talking to so many attorneys, industries. If there's something going on relevant to the rental industry, he goes about and he asks and find out, and he brings it to life. And he's got a whole training available. But we'll go into that a bit more later on. Shaun, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, and thank you for the invitation.
Shaun,
and we haven't had any snow, but we've had lots of mist and lots of rain.
Yeah, you see, it was even cold in KZN. I was super surprised to see it's cold in KZN. It's the first time I actually feel cold.
Yeah, no, the weather's upside down, but yeah, such is it. But anyhow, thanks for the invitation.
Shaun, so the topic today is vetting, and at most, I want our attendees that's here today to take away a couple of key factors to keep in mind. And of course, in your experience, I don't know if everyone always have the right procedures in place, because I think vetting is sometimes, it's a running. I mean, agents run at the end of the time. I mean, it's pressure, get the tenant, get the lease, get all of those type of things. But I think structure is important, and you're a structure man. What would be your suggestion if you start with vetting? Where does your vetting start?
Where does my vetting start?
Yes.
Well, I was very pleased to hear that although you co-host with me on the boot camps, you do listen and you do remember, because I agree with you. Well, not I agree with you. You've learned from me that vetting starts the moment you meet the person for the first time. And that could be the very first telephone conversation. And I'll tell you why I say that. It's because we talk about vetting and people think credit checks and people think all those sorts of things. But it's more to it than just that. In the end, I always say we paint a picture for the landlord, because remember, we don't take the decision about this. So we are painting a picture of this application or group of applicants for the landlord. And that could be, they don't arrive on time. They shout at you because they got stuck in traffic, or they shout at you because you have to go to the next meeting, or something like that. If that starts happening, and I've got to use extreme cases, for example, I had a group of prostitutes, and they were really prostitutes, because their pay slips were from last night at the White House, which was a whorehouse in Auckland. But anyhow, they arrived with these RTDs in their hands, and they were half drunk and blah, blah, blah. Then already you know something, and you've made a mental note of it. And so when you're painting the picture for your landlord, you've got to put these things in your report as well to justify your recommendation to the landlord. So yes, it does start there. It also, part of it has to do with when you're asking for supporting documentation. This is sort of the fluffy part of it, not the black and white part of it. When you're asking for supporting documentation, and they don't, people don't supply it, then you have to start thinking, well, if you can't understand that when I ask for a copy of your ID, I say it must be attached, you don't attach it. Well, if you can't understand that, are you going to understand that you're going to pay your rent on the first of the month and we're going to have problems every month? All those sorts of things go with it, and that becomes important because, that sort of all goes with it. But you have to have you've got to have a process, a checklist, a format that you work through, because you're quite right. I know from being an agent, being a rental manager, being a part business owner, that in rentals especially, people, their phone rings all the time. People want to view things, and everything was now. Nothing. I don't want to make an appointment for you. Listen here, I'm looking at that house in that street. Can you come here now and show it to me? Those things happen. Or I've got to speak to Poppy now because there's an emergency. And you're going, it's like, no, the tap's leaking. When did it start? 3 weeks ago. So the point is, people they get disturbed the whole time. So you've got to make sure that you're ticking your boxes as you're going along and interpreting the documentation. And I think even more these days, having that documentation available, just like we do keep the credit check available, just like we keep the lease agreement, just like we keep the FICA docs available, you need to store that documentation somewhere so that if you are ever challenged on that, And
I think,
especially now with the PPA and the mandatory disclosure form and blah, 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 that could all become important.
Shaun, that's amazing. And that's true, because I think, you know, we think we're going to remember, but then things happen and you can't remember, why would I have done that? Or what transpired that I actually accepted it? We had a matter where the mother applied for the unit and everything, but it was for her son and the cousin to move in. And the big problem is the cousin and the son is like, I want to say serious hippies going to more extreme drug using. And so the picture was painted to the landlord on, you know, this is the applicant, this is going to be the tenant, but that's not the tenant that's going to stay there. And when the owner then found out about these hippies, and I'm not prejudicing, I'm trying to put it as politely as possible. But now he's got a problem that severe drug users are in the
People
property.
are allowed to be free-spirited. However, so let's take that example. So sorry, I'm not used to being a guest. I'm used to being in charge.
It's fun. I know how to manage you.
I need to wait for a question.
Okay.
Okay,
So but I mean, what
okay.
is your opinion on this scenario?
Okay, so in that situation, my question would be, did the application form ask questions about who is going to be staying there? And not just number of adults, number of children. No, that is last century's information. Now we want the name and the ID number and the relationship to the main tenant. Okay, few reasons for that. Point number one, I want to make sure that somebody that's on the lease is staying there, because that's important. I'm allowed to tell my stories.
Yes, please.
Okay.
That's the amazing
I
part.
live in a block. I live in a block of flats, and there's another door right next to mine, like that, which is my neighbor. Well, she used to be my neighbor, and she was renting under a lease agreement of her ex-husband because of a divorce order, and so they put the lease agreement in the ex-husband's name. Something happened. He didn't pay. We couldn't contact her because she's not on the lease agreement. In the end, lease was terminated. They were given until next week to get out. I was passing this woman in the passage saying hello, and she was saying hello, until eventually she got the message through the ex-husband. But by then, we'd already told them they had to be out. And so ever since then, I said, somebody that lives in the flat has to be on the application form, because then at least when I'm giving notices like that, I started not on the application form, on the lease. Somebody who lives there must be on the lease, because then when I'm giving notices, I'm including them in that notice. And so I think things like that are important. But in your particular case, when we're talking about that now, because you can do a certain amount of vetting on those people too. You can also check out who they are. You can, if you use the TPN, and I'm not here working for TPN and I don't get any cut from TPN, but if you have the ID number of the person, you can do a basic assessment just based on an ID number. Then you can at least check out, are they who they say they are? Are they known to home affairs? Do they have any other credit risk? Do they have, unfortunately, we won't pick up if they've got any drug bust, but we will pick up if they've got R1 million owing and somebody's chasing them. And so they're sort of trying to come into yours under the guise of an occupant, for example.
Yes.
So one needs to do those sorts of things too. One can't just say, okay, that's fine. I mean, one would assume in that particular case that the mommy did say there was going to be 2 other occupants, but mommy didn't say she wasn't going to be staying there.
But Shaun, the thing is, I think people are so concentrating on vetting and on the person that can afford the rental, that they sort of forget how important it is also to know who's going to stay in the unit. We're busy with 2 evictions where exactly that's the situation. The tenant is the one that can afford it. They enter into the lease because the tenant has now been vetted and everything, but they're not the people staying in the unit. And then there's an argument between the occupants and the tenant, and then the tenant just goes, well, do what you can, because I don't really care. I'm not staying in the unit, so I'm not going to be evicted. So I think it's super important to not just vet somebody for being affordability, it's also the type of tenant it's going to be. because breaches of non-complying with rules, all of those things actually happen as well.
But what I was almost going to say, well, things like that are normally covered in the lease. Okay. However, what we do have to remember when it comes to problems with the lease and it comes to vetting is the one step of the process where we can try and avoid potential issues. We never guaranteed, but we've got to make sure that we cover as much as possible ground, do as many as possible checks to try and avoid these situations. So the first question is, you tell the tenant that at least one occupant needs to be, this is part of your application guidelines. You know, I have a set of application guidelines that go with my training, where we say to them, at least one applicant needs to intend to live in the residence. So that's what we set out. Then we ask for the ID and the etc. of the occupants, so we can do some checking on them. We specify the occupants. So when if they are vetted and they transfer to the lease, we say it's pit pompies and petronella pompies of ID number blah 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 that will be living in this residence. We don't say 2 adults, because yeah, you can find 2 adults on the street corner. You can have they can be swapping between the street corner and your spare bedroom all the time, and you can do nothing about it. But at least if you've got them specified, and you come there sometime to do an inspection, it's like, these adults have shrunk, or these 2 kids have grown. Yo, what are you feeding these kiddies now? Then at least you've got something. But also more important than that, I think it's not only that, but when you start asking that information on the application form and you insist on it, application forms are not foofies. Application forms are just as important as the vetting. Because if you don't ask for the information, you can't check the information, and people forget that. Excuse me. When I tell people that in my training, the first half of the training, we deal with the application form, then they're like, ooh. But you've got to know what to ask for. You've got to understand why you don't let people leave blank spaces. You've got to understand why people have to initial every page.
Yeah.
You've got to understand those very, very basic things, because that's where people get scallum. And I don't know the word in any other. Sneaky is the English word, but I don't know it in any other African languages. But you know, where it says, asks you about something and then you just leave it blank. I say, no, I don't accept that. You must put a line through it and say not acceptable, because later on, if I found out it was actually applicable or not applicable, it was applicable and you lied to me. It is, or you're sitting on a wave because you're bouncing up and down.
I'm sorry, man. I just had to change, move the table a bit.
I thought maybe the sea had got you. Anyhow, you've got to be able to have something to go back and say, I'm sorry, but you lied to me. You're out of here. You're out of here now. So people don't understand that, or we don't focus on that enough. In the end, that whole application vetting, whole application process is setting that tenancy up the way you want it to continue. And the way they treat you then, I'm telling you, they're going to treat you 10 times worse later. So you've got to bear that in mind too. That's the informal side.
And Shaun, I love what you're saying now. Is it's not just whether they can afford it. Is this the tenant you want to enter into this relationship? Is this the tenant you want to occupy the property? The tenant or the persons that occupy through them, because that's how you're going to prevent future fights. That's what I think. A lot of people think everything is just about affordability, but it's not just about affordability. There's much more. I mean, Shaun has also had a big drive where we're actually teaching agents to fire landlords, or to prevent tenants that's so abusive. So
I don't have a landlord firing drive. I think you put that too harshly. But I do have a session later this month with Bruno and my rental training club about how we can legally fire landlords for particular reasons that, people didn't notice at the beginning that they should never have signed the mandate.
Okay, so not a drive, but I think that is we shouldn't make our lives more difficult. And especially when you have more than one applicant applying, let's make it as easy as possible. Xpello is that's where we actually came in with the application process, where we say, let the tenant pay for Xpello, because if you have 5 applicants and you have one tenant willing to pay for Xpello, that clearly is going to help you pick the correct tenant. So that's definitely an important thing, and we'll drop the link there if you want to find out more. Just email me and I'll set up a session to explain you guys more about what I mean by the tenant paying for it. But Shaun, now, of course, affordability does play a role. And I mean, we look at, so firstly, let me ask this. When you want to determine somebody can afford a unit, what do you look at?
Okay, point nine. I have 2 phases of affordability in my process. I have my initial affordability, which is my simplistic affordability. Show me what you get in your bank, divided by 3, and is it more than the rent? Okay, so in other words, people must net 3 times the rent. This is not a figure that I suck out of my thumb. This is a figure that has proven in South African rental industry is an affordability rate. I've had an argument with it. Well, I wouldn't say I have an argument. I had an applicant once who didn't fulfill that criteria, and that's the basic criteria. So all I need to do is have copies of your bank, copies of your pay slips, copies of your bank statements, look at it and see if you can pay the rent 3 times out of the money you get. I'm forgetting that you got to eat and all that stuff. That's my very simplistic one. If you fail there, it's no use in me moving forward. I'm also one to say, we've got enough on our plate to do, so we must cut our losses when we need to. So if they don't even fulfill that, I stop the process there. I make a recommendation to the landlord. Why waste your time doing anything else? So that's one basic criteria. And I remember here, I know agents go outside of that. Beware. That's all I can say is beware. Because if you go outside of that, okay, you are misleading your landlord, I believe, if you are not clear to them that the industry norm is 3 times. And they can then later, if anything goes wrong, they can allege that you went outside industry practices, in my opinion. Because that industry practice is a very strict industry practice. People talk about it all over the place. But I remember that, anyhow, get into my story. Little town. Lady happens to work upstairs from me, or they always happen to in these cases. I say, sorry, unfortunately, you don't fulfill our criteria. Wishing you all the best. Here's the list of other rentals, blah, blah, blah. I suggest you have a look at private landlords. I always say that to tenants. So anyhow, so we did this. Then I get this call. And this call was from a woman at another agency in town. And she said, oh, I'm a friend of so-and-so. And I said, oh, really? That's nice. And she said, no, but I believe that she wasn't, she was turned down for a rental with you. I said, well, I can't discuss other people's business with you. So I'm not sure. No, but she's such a nice lady. I said, I understand, but I can't discuss the stuff. No, but she's totally trustworthy. I said, would you like to co-sign with her? No. So I said, okie dokie, well, I don't know why you're calling me. I said, but just tell me, what are your vetting criteria? And she said, no, we're allowed up to about 45% of income. And I thought, good luck to you. Now I hope you know how to evict. But anyhow, so with that, her boss also called me and said, you're such a nice lady. And I said, do you want to co-sign, or do you understand? No. So yes, you must have very strict. So, okay. So that's my first affordability criteria. Then I don't do vetting. I don't do landlord checks. I don't do employer checks. I don't do any of those checks. By the way, too many agents, in my opinion, think that an employer checks means you see a copy of their statement. Oh, I've got a copy of their statement, employer check. That's not an employer check.
What statement? A copy of their salary slip?
Their salary slip, sorry.
Pay slip, okay. Pay slip, yes.
So yeah. I just had a message from somebody saying they're watching my boot camp and they're feeling more confident after every time they watch my stuff. Isn't that nice? Sorry. So pay slip, the pay slip. So the point is, you can't just go on these things. You've got to check these things. So he took my thought away. So that's the
Shaun,
basics.
let me quickly stop. So I like that the first guideline, the quick one is, can they afford is the income 3 times the rent? I have to say, from Xpello side, we're not that strict on that. And I think that this is, again, we're not the agent. So we don't, I know different areas work differently, but I think that's a very good guideline. Either if you have so many applications, I think definitely if you've got 5 applications, start with the ones that earns 3 times the rent. That makes more sense to me. But I think if you're in an area where you struggle to find people, or, then you have to say, okay, they're not earning, let's go into your second step, the more let's investigate, because I do think people jump in and they do all of these vetting, spend so much time on somebody they in the back of their mind, no, not going to qualify. So
yeah, so the first step is just to see 3 times.
Yeah.
Okay. If you don't earn 3 times, then we don't go any further, because it's as simple as that. But then we go and do our further checks, our employer checks. Sorry, and that's what I was talking about just now when I got distracted. Employer check is not just checking that they actually have a payslip. You've got to call the employer. You've got to Google the employer. You've got to make sure these people are real. I mean, I think you've seen the fraudulent documents that I've received from clients. You've got to check these things, ladies and gentlemen. If somebody says, my employer is Sophie, and this is her cell phone number, you don't call Sophie the cell phone number and say, hello, Sophie. No, you Google Sophie. You ask what company it is. You take that pay slip and you check it over the bank statement. You do all those sorts of things. But then at the end, when everything else, people say they're good people, all this stuff, you check the landlord, you check the previous landlord there, not just this landlord, because this landlord want to get rid of them. You go to the previous landlord. And then now you're comfortable. Now you say, okay, now I've got to do my final check. My final check is a proper credit check where I must use a credit. I think it's almost compulsory these days, or should be compulsory, that you use a credit check where you can see what their monthly expenses and commitments are. Their monthly expenses and commitments. Once again, Angelo applied to us once. Angelo wanted to rent a flat that was 7,200 Rand a month. Angelo happened to be in the South African Navy. He happened to be an officer, and he happened to be of a certain rank, same rank that my father was. And so Angelo's take-home pay, money paid into the bank every month, was 26,000. What would he do? 3 times to a 7.2 becomes 21.6. A lot of money still left for them to spend. No problem. Come to the last one and we get the proper credit check with all of the outgoings. Angelo's outgoings are 17,970 or something like that, was his commitments every month. His commitments every month. Now, granted, Angelo was paying a mortgage, a bank loan, a house loan. Angelo was going to go and rent his house out, but he was only renting it out for 5, which was not really going to make much of a difference. And because he was going to manage it himself, I wouldn't even take that income into account, because I know what people are like managing themselves. So Angelo, who was netting 26, wanting to rent for 7.2, who is perfectly good at that level, then all of a sudden became Angelo, who was netting 9, wanting to rent for 7.
Yeah. And
I said, unfortunately, no, I got the landlord to agree. And then the first thing the agent said to me was, oh, but he's so nice. And I said, yeah, he is quite nice, but then you must go for Brian. Eh? But then when I told them, you know what they said to me? Oh, shame, he was going to sell his motorbike to pay the deposit.
Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah.
Huh? So
I
you see, there's always something, a crinkle in the cardboard.
And I actually, you're raising something, and I think a lot of agents get this wrong. So just one step back. Yes, please, and consider reports is going to show their fixed expenses every month. That's going to go
I was
out.
going to see if I do have such a dummy report somewhere. Let me see if I can.
Well, while you look for it, I'm gonna. So people, we have to remember. Then there's a lot of expenses that's not always going to show on that credit report. I mean, sometimes school fees don't show. If you're going to have to live on noodles when you apply, you are going to definitely run into problems 3 or 4 months from now because everything is becoming more expensive. The second thing is, I see this so often when people apply to us saying, well, they don't have affordability, but they're going to pay a double deposit. Just because they pay a double deposit or pay 3 months up front, after that time period, they're not going to be able to afford it. So it doesn't matter if they pay up front. If they can't afford to stay there, they can't afford to stay there. So no amount of deposit or upfront, except if they pay the whole 12 months. But the problem is after 12 months, I hope they're going to vacate because otherwise they might not be able to afford it. So affordability cannot be fixed by additional payments, that because they are going to say, well, I paid 3 months, I'm going to stay for 3 months and then only start paying. So please keep that in mind. Deposits doesn't get that. Shaun, you can just let me know as soon as you have that report. I think you can share your screen. Are you still on mute? So please look at the expenses and affordability. Okay, Shaun, it's showing. You're still on mute, sir. Let me see if I can unmute you.
No, I only
I
muted
think
myself.
there's-
Somebody doesn't like me. They keep on muting me. Okay, so let's just worry about the important parts. Yeah. This is Angelo's one. Okay. 26,841 was the income, and it was 7.2 was his rental. 3 times 7 is 21, 3 2 is 6, so 21.6, no problem whatsoever. ID was verified, no judgments, nothing. But then we get to this part. Yeah. Where was I now? Yeah, this part, yeah. This part, yeah. Sorry, I split over 2 pages. I always keep this as I had this as an example in my little kit when I speak to landlords to scare them so that they don't try and do the stuff themselves. So no judgments, no collections, nothing. But his exposure of his balance was 857,097 rand. I don't know. That means nothing to me. But his monthly installments on his debts was 17,249. So now all of a sudden, we start going to 26,000 into the bank. Minus 7,249 leaves you with 9. And you
then he
want to
hasn't
rent
even bought food yet.
7.2. And you haven't got food. And there was a wife with a baby that was going to go to creche. And they told me creche cost 3,000. I said, I don't know how this man going to live. They said, nobody's going to rent his house out for 5,000. I said, but even if that tenant pays that 5,000 every month, even if they do, 3,000 already going for the baby for the creche, it don't make no sense to me. Yeah. So what I'm saying here is, and this was the point I was trying to make, Elise, is if you do not get a credit check with this information in it, and I know a lot of people don't, if you don't get a credit check with this information, you can't paint a picture because you can't even see the picture yourself. It's like you're not wearing your glasses.
And Shaun, I just want to add, also, I know in application forms, people go and fill in all the expenses. You cannot just accept what they tell you. You need to go verify it because we all tell that little, that short thing of, I know my credit card, it says I have to pay 5, but actually I only pay 3, or, whatever story it is, you have to go verify if the expenses that are listing are actually the expenses that's due and payable.
So I think it's, coming back to your initial question, I think it's important to, that thing about them from the moment you meet people for the first time or interact with them first time, I call that the feeling in the tummy. It's important to remember the feeling in your tummy. And I'm not talking about because you had a curry last night. I'm talking about your feeling about people. Now, you left with a warm feeling in the tummy, or you're like, never want to see them again. If that's the feeling, gut feel, I think is the way we call
Yes.
it. Gut feel. Please remember your gut feel. Even share your gut feel with the landlord as part of this painting the picture. The second thing is you've got to know what their commitments are. Otherwise, seriously, you're flying blind. You're seriously flying blind, because Angelo is an example of one where if we did not know that, Angelo would have got in there.
Yeah.
And I'm sure Angelo would have got into trouble because his wife didn't have a job. Or he would have either got into trouble by either making her work or not paying, one of the two. And follow a process so that you don't miss anything, because I know people are going to disturb you the whole time.
Yeah. Shaun, David is asking a question. Are credit checks
Yeah.
and affordability assessments still necessary if the potential tenant offers to prepay upfront the total rent for the entire lease duration due to a bad credit or a foreign national without a credit record? Now, David, I just want to say here, and Shaun can just after give his 2 cents after I'm done. As I said before, remember the credit report. If the credit report is because of previous, they didn't pay their Vodacom account or anything to that effect, I mean, then that is not, I mean, yes, you can consider it for placing this tenant, or if they don't have records. But if they can't afford it, the credit report, it comes down, then you go to your bank statements. If they pay upfront for a year, because they can't afford it, you know that you're going to struggle on month 13, 14, or 15. Oh, and therefore, because they're not going to be able to pay it once this money is up. So that's my biggest fear always is, if there's a bad, there's a difference between having a bad credit report because of past defaults, or because of no information, and because somebody doesn't have affordability. Am I saying this correctly, Shaun? There's a big difference. You have to determine, is there somebody because of bad behavior in the past, or not bad behavior, but not paying his expenses in the past, and somebody that cannot afford it? That's a big difference.
Okay. Firstly, I believe when you are assessing a tenant for a credit check, for a vetting, it is incumbent upon you to make sure that they can afford it. Affordability. I'm not interested how much they're going to pay me up front. I'm not interested in anything. I want to know if they, as people, can afford it. Now, and did I share my screen?
It's not shared at this moment.
Okay. I'm going to go back to, sorry, I opened the wrong document here. Let me just get the right document. And this goes back to your mandated responsibilities. Sorry, I opened the lease instead of the mandate. Let's hope I'll get it right this time.
And I just want to tell all of you guys, please, afterwards, we are going to share Shaun's link. But because he's got a document or referral for absolutely everything. Thank you, Shaun.
So this is just the TPN rental mandate, okay? And the TPN rental mandate, and most people use some other version of this. It says, where am I? Sorry, this was unplanned. The property practitioner is tasked with finding a suitable tenant to lease the premises from the landlord. In so doing, the property practitioner has the rights and duties set out below, being responsible for the following: performing all vetting, including credit, employment, and other reference checks on potential tenants. So yes, you have signed a contract with the landlord whereby part of the service you provide is to do all of these checks. Okay, that's point number one. So David, my first answer there would be, it depends on the contract you signed with your landlord. But if you offer a landlord a contract that says, no, I'm not going to do any vetting or anything as long as they give me cash, I can tell you that I can convince your landlord not to sign with you. I'm going to come back to that now. That was just the one side. Now it also says, in the event that the tenant has been correctly screened and placed by the property practitioner, in other words, vetted, at least credit, employment, and other those reference checks done. That is correctly vetted. So in the event that the tenant has been correctly screened and placed by the property practitioner in terms of this mandate, then the property practitioner cannot be held liable to the landlord for any loss or damage, including not paying rent or vacating the premises early. Ladies and gentlemen, the converse of this is true. In the event that the tenant was not correctly screened, in other words, you didn't do any of those things properly, you could be liable to the landlord for any loss, damage, or the tenant vacating the property early. That's not a responsibility I would like you to ever end up with. So I think the very simple question is and there's a part of me that wants to go to the beginning in my head, and the beginning is, let me say this before I repeat myself. As soon as somebody offers me upfront payment, they are trying to obscure me. It's a red herring. They're trying to deflect me. And I see that as a red flag. I see that as a red flag. As soon as they say, oh, we'll pay 6 months up front. We'll pay 12 months up front.
Yeah.
I don't even tell the landlord that until I've vetted them. Because, ladies and gentlemen, 6 months up front or 12 months up front does not mean that really. Because you've got lots of other dilemmas, and we're dealing with vetting now, so I don't want to go into this too much. But let's say, Elise, can I just go off on a tangent quickly?
A quick tangent.
Okay. It's July. They say they moved in on the 1st of July. They offered you 12 months up front. You took that 12 months up front and you paid it out to the landlord. Scenario. On the 12th of July today, they decided, no, they're going to move. So they give you 20 business notice in terms of the Consumer Protection Act. They're going to move out on the 16th of August. Let's say that's 20 business days from now. Now, David and everybody else, you have to refund them all of the prepaid money from the 17th of August until the 31st of June next year. It has to be credited. That's what the Consumer Protection Act 6 and 14 says. So now you have to write to your landlord and say, I need you to please put this huge amount of money back in my bank account. The landlord says, oh, no, but we just booked our ski trip to Italy and we paid it. We don't have that money. Just a scenario, ladies and gentlemen. I actually made a company policy that we did not accept rental upfront because it is simply it's a red herring. They're trying to take my attention away from the vetting process. And David, you did mention foreigners, etc., etc. This is not a xenophobic comment. And David, I know that you are busy watching at the moment. I think you're on day 2 today because I got an email from you yesterday of the boot camp recording. So I think we have addressed that later on in the boot camp. I think day 3 or 4. But foreigners are even more complicated because you've got to make sure they're legally in the country, because if the landlord enters into a lease agreement with they used to call it an illegal alien, but then ET came along. So somebody who's not legally in the country, it is a criminal offense, not a civil offense, a criminal offense. Sorry, Elise, sorry, I went off tangent, but that thing about paying money up front, ladies and gentlemen, I eventually banned it in my offices because the landlord wants it immediately, but then the tenant's actually entitled to it all back, just about all back if they give early cancellation. So be really, really, really cautious and make sure you've got a proper procedure for that.
So one thing that we know with money up front, because a lot of people do see that as like a carrot in front of any application. So one of the things that we say, be careful of this carrot, is firstly, that money must be kept then in your trust account and released monthly back to the landlord.
And you're going to make sure that that's in your mandate, because your landlord is going to argue with you. Mine went all the way to head office.
Yeah. So
to complain, and head office said I must pay it out. I said, you people don't understand rentals.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Because that money isn't really due and payable as they use it. It's a pay as you go. That's the first thing. The second thing is, remember, it doesn't fix affordability. And the thing is, remember, the moment you give somebody occupation, if they can't afford it, to get rid of them is going to be a problem. So I think that's the other thing, David. Just because a lease terminates doesn't mean they're going to vacate. So that's why I'm very hesitant to give somebody occupation that might be a problem in the future. We might not have a problem now, but later on. So don't give occupation to a potential problem later.
Elise, this might be one of those cases where you say, we're willing to take up front, but we want you to pay for Xpello so that you pay for your own eviction if you actually don't have money in a year's time.
Shaun, it's funny enough. So what we are, our approach and our application team is actually on here is, most people that pays up front is because they don't have affordability. And for that reason,
that's why they're trying to get your attention away from it. That's why.
And for that reason, we usually will not accept it. Because we say to them, if you're so comfortable, clearly you won't need Xpello in the next 12 months because they've paid, so they're not in breach. And you won't be able to confirm affordability in 12 months' time, so they will not qualify for Xpello. Xpello, as you guys know, we look at all different types of credit reports, whether they're foreigners or, A or B, C rating. Our cornerstone is always affordability. Can they afford to stay in the unit? And if there's affordability, if there's no affordability, doesn't matter how much they're going to pay us, we are not going to consider it. And just to come quickly to a question that Val is asking is, in determining the affordability, you have to ask them all those, what is their expenses? You have to ask them, listen, school fees, all of those type of things. What is the amount you spend on groceries? I see you arrive with your car. What is your car? What are you paying for your car? Because they don't put all of that information in there. People, if you have a family of 4, for example, if they tell you the groceries is 1,000 Rand, I will be concerned, because I'm quite sure milk and bread for the month is 1,000 Rand. So I think ask them. And also that's where your bank statements, I almost want to say the cornerstone of any application is the bank statements, because that's like a storybook. That's going to tell you where they spend their money. If somebody goes to the strip club and the liquor store on a daily basis, you're not going to let the property that's surrounded by old people to that person, because it's going to be a nuisance. They're going to party too much. So look at what is on the bank statement. And it's also going to help the people that doesn't have much information on their credit reports. So the bank statements is going to show how they spend their money, and that will be able to be a basis if they don't have any information on their credit report. Do you agree, Shaun, regarding the bank statements?
I do, and I just want to clarify something.
Yes.
Everybody is popia ba mal. There's another word you can put there that's much more effective. No. But everybody is popia ba whatever, bahok. Everybody is popia bahok. Because these days, and I heard somebody the other day say something stupid, and I want to clap people when I say that, but well, I'm not an aggressive person, but then I have to understand they're just average and they're not clever. But I've heard of people say, I'm not giving my bank statements because of Popia. Popia says I don't have to give you my bank statements. I just want to say another word, but I can't say it. Story.
Yes,
nonsense. Rubbish. Popia does not give anybody, does not say that I cannot request information or that you can refuse to give it to me. Popia says I have to have systems and processes and procedures in place to protect the information you give me. The protection of personal information, not the prohibition of personal information.
I love that.
So you have to have systems in place. And of course you do. And we deal with very secretive information and very personal information. Of course you do. But if your procedures, and your procedures should, ladies and gentlemen, if your procedures don't do this, then I'm already hearing warning bells. You should get a copy of the bank statement. Last year, I did an information session on fraudulent documents. You get fraudulent bank statements, fraudulent paid checks, fraudulent people, fraudulent everything. So you've got to be able to cross-check. So if somebody says to me, I won't give you my bank statement because of Popia. Then I say, well, Popia is not working so well for you because I'm not processing your application further. Good luck, go find another agency. I don't talk to people like that. I just say it in a nicer way. But that's basically what I'm saying. I am still entitled to require information. I'm still entitled, I just have an obligation to protect it. So yes, Elise, you've got to have things in this day and age, the bank statements that I've seen, the pay slips that I've seen, the person with a fake ID, the man that had 2 IDs, one that he uses when he owns a house, the one that he uses when he wants to rent a house, because the owning a house one went into bankruptcy. Those things, ladies and gentlemen, is scary out there. It's scary out there. Somebody also asked here about, often the applicant comes up as not found at Home Affairs and the landlord agrees to take the tenant on. I've got to make a comment here, Elise. I can't hold myself in, even if you try and stop me. Ladies and gentlemen, please never, ever, 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 I'm saying this as nicely as possible, tell me that the landlord said it's okay. The landlord is not the rental expert. You are getting paid to be the rental expert. Don't please ever say to me, the landlord said. Ladies and gentlemen, you are putting yourself out there as the rental expert. You're charging money for it. You must add your value. You must be the knowledgeable one. You must know that if it says not found at Home Affairs, this is somebody that does not exist legally in this country. It must shout in your head already for that. I'm sorry to go on about this, but it's true. That means that the person's ID is not registered at Home Affairs. You can't. The fact that somebody says the landlord agrees, you should not even tell the landlord about that person. You're scaring me. You're really, really, really scaring me, because you must then say, Mr. and Mrs. Landlord, this person doesn't exist.
So, Shaun, you're correct there. And I think that's on Charmaine's question is, Charmaine, I think what is important as well is, I think I've heard TPN also say in the past is when you do this, I think it specifically referred to the TPN check, and that pops up. Check in with TPN if they've got anything on their side, because sometimes it happens that Home Affairs is offline, and it happens more than often that they're offline and it doesn't pick up anything. I also have seen people that, they do the search. Actually, recently, the report said the person is dead. But the person is sitting well alive in front of the agent. So things like that does
a person is sitting in front of the agent.
No. It was actually, so there was a fraudulent transaction on Home Affairs, so they accidentally made the wrong person deceased. So the ID looked exactly the same, or everything checked. The only thing was the status showed that he was deceased. So
yeah, if it says something like that, at least call TPN.
Yeah. So firstly, if no information is found, check with TPN and make sure. But yes, it is of concern. And Shaun, what you're saying is so important. You guys are the experts. You are doing all of the trainings. You are doing all of that. So you should guide your landlord. So just what we've learned as attorneys in the past. Remember, an attorney cannot tell a client what to do. That's not their job, but they guide them. So what they will say is, we have found that this person is not picked on on Home Affairs, and it is our suggestion that this person is not considered. So that is important, that you always guide them and they will follow your guidance. But I see too many agents giving these open questions, and it's not just specific to that, Shaun. I know you say we shouldn't even present it, but I think overall, don't give those open questions like, here's information, here's the credit report, do you want them? That's not the guidance.
Sorry, Elise, that's exactly what I was saying. It's not, I cannot get myself out of a hole by saying the landlord told me to.
Yeah.
Because the landlord is employing me and they're paying me a lot of money, okay? Less than what you want, but they're paying me money to add value to this transaction. So I need to advise them. If I, of course, every single application that you process must have a recommendation to the landlord. But in that recommendation, I say, warning sign,
Yes.
does not compare with Home Affairs, decline.
Yes.
If that landlord comes to me, and says, I want to go with them, I will say, and I have done this to a landlord because I was not comfortable with a tenancy. I said to the landlord, I will not be part of this. Sorry, I'm withdrawing my services.
Yeah.
You will pay for a procurement. You will acknowledge that you went against my advice, and you will absolve me from any future problems because I am not participating. Pay me a finder's fee, and I'm out of your hair. I'll put you in touch with one another. And then they say, no, but I want it. I say, no, you're not getting no details unless you pay me 1 month's rent. I found that person, but I'm not prepared to manage them. We've got to start adding our values, showing our worth, and thinking of ourselves as professionals, not as PAs.
Yes,
We're not
absolutely.
PAs.
So just to say,
Sorry, this is like my little passion.
yeah, but the thing is, somebody has to stand and sort of repeat and remind agents their worth. I think you guys forget how hard you really work. So just to say, well, regarding TPN, so TPN is linked to Home Affairs, and
Yes.
it's oh, now I'm feeling
And
it's
that's
Charmaine.
also,
What was
sorry,
the lady that joined us with TPN? It was Charmaine. Oh, she's a
Chanel.
Chanel. Yes, she's an
Chanel.
absolute fabulous lady. And she said that sometimes if there's ever something popping up, just contact the TPN office and they'll gladly assist. And I
No,
think
because
that's a
Home
very
Affairs, as you can imagine, just like the lights, are sometimes offline. So when they're offline, they can't confirm with Home Affairs. Home Affairs doesn't allow them to keep a copy of their database for them for understandable reasons.
so.
Sorry, so you just contact Home Affairs so that, yeah. So that's the one thing. Yeah, we've just and be very, very cautious of foreigners, ladies and gentlemen.
So
not because I'm scared of them, but they must be legally in the country.
That's of course another thing as well. So while it's already 10 o'clock and I'm loving the questions and the feedback that's coming through, and I do think people have to learn from each other. One of the things I do want to ask, and this is purely out of curiosity from our side, is vetting is a very time consuming process. I mean, and lots of people, what I realize, don't always have the back office, or the poor back office is so overworked. I mean, they don't have the capacity. So I'm running this poll, if it's hopefully popping up on your side. Is it something that you would ever consider outsourcing? Outsourcing your vetting process, putting the reports, checking the details, and getting a full thing. I was just very curious. And if we ever, because a lot of people are actually contacting Xpello from their side, is it something, what would be a reasonable amount for you to pay? So if you send something to Xpello and say, Xpello, from now on, we fill in the link, you guys do the vetting and you supply me with the report, and we can take it to the landlord. Is it something that you guys would actually think of? And I think that is quite important. Shaun, I didn't want to throw you off. I just wanted to run that poll because I was very curious about this. That's how we keep up to date with everything, is asking the people what's happening and what will work, and instead of just thinking about it. So on vetting, what we've realized now is our first assessment of a person is super important. I absolutely agree. Get the tenant that's going to enter into the lease agreement, the lessee, and the occupants, if possible. Always have one occupant also completing. Although the occupant might not be able to do the affordability, but he's the person that has to comply with the rules of abiding to everything. So don't just make the tenants the people that can afford it. Your credit reports, guys, please don't just opt for the cheapest report. Get the fullest report. We see a lot of people trying to save costs, and then they save like 10 rand and they get the cheap report that doesn't say anything. So please go get a complete report. And then a last thing that I really want to mention, part of the vetting, and that is just when we get to juristic people, is get the resolutions. People, if a company is applying and there's more than one director, please make sure you get the necessary resolution, that the directors confirm the person entering into the lease agreement is authorized. Shaun, there's still a big problem. People they just run with it. And I actually start advising people, if it's a small company and there's one director, or especially if the director is going to move into the property, please let them sign as a tenant as well. You agree,
Yes,
Shaun?
you've got to get, and I must admit, companies and legal entities are not my favorite tenants. Okay. You get companies, for example, that wants the applicant that are applying for one of their staff members. I've always in the past insisted that the staff member also be a tenant or also be a signatory to the lease agreement, because that covers us in terms of if anything goes wrong and we need to issue notices, they get issued as well. If they're not a tenant, I can't issue them notice, and especially now with personal information and all that sort of stuff. I can't let them know about that notice. So I think it's very important. You must, with smaller companies, you must get personal securities by all of the directors. And ladies and gentlemen, we've got to think of it this way. If they refuse to give it, then we've got to say why. We don't then have to say, which is often the reaction, is like, oh, how am I going to get this to work without that then? No, if they're saying no, there's a reason why, and it's not a good sign. It's not a good sign.
So Sharon, yeah, sorry,
sorry.
Shaun. So Sharon,
Sorry.
I think Shaun is answering it very nicely. She's asking the question, and I see this quite often. Foreign companies is launching in South Africa and wanting to lease a residential property for an employee. I think especially in these circumstances, Sharon, get the employee to sign as well, because remember, the employee can stay in that property because the company is paying the rent. But what if he gets fired? Is he going to vacate? Or what if he decides, listen, but he likes South Africa, he wants to go work for a different company? So I think just to enforce the notices, that you don't send it to somebody that speaks Russian and don't understand the notices, that you at least send it to the occupants as well, that they know that they need to vacate or something is wrong. So always get the company and the tenant to sign. I think that's the safer option. That is also what we've been advising many of the companies.
Also remember that any breaches of the lease, any legal steps, any evictions, anything that has to take place because of non-compliance with the lease happens in the South African jurisdiction. So if that company is overseas, you can't chase them. Think about that. So you might you might ask for a higher deposit, for example, to protect you.
Yeah, so Shaun, just you can, but it's going to be so expensive it won't make financial sense.
Okay, sorry.
So
you're quite right. You can, but we wouldn't be able to afford a lawyer for 1 minute.
Definitely. There's another question. Which application documents of potential tenants do you share with the landlord as to protect the agent's procurement fee in case the landlord doesn't want to listen to the agent's advice and proceed to contract with the potential tenant who didn't qualify for the rental application? So I think the first question is, what documents do you share with the landlord?
Okay, officially, you should share. I think you're obliged to share any documents with the landlord that the tenant submits, because you are working as the agent of the landlord. You are not the landlord. So I do not believe that you have any leeway there. You are working for the landlord. You are simply the agent of the landlord. If the landlord wants to see that information, you are obliged to show it to them.
That's the first thing. Then, and of course, again, that's why you have your mandate. It's important to sign the mandate to make sure that you are protected for your fees, and you have to give the guidance. Listen, if you give the guidance to the landlord and the landlord doesn't want to accept your guidance, and they, for example, still want to place the tenants, then that's where it comes in. It's up to you whether you are going to place the tenant and manage it, or are you going to tell the landlord, listen, I'm taking my procurement money, as Shaun said, and you have to manage it yourself, because, I mean, the risk is just too high. I think that is the important thing. Shaun, you have given us such value input, and your knowledge is always fantastic. Thank you very much for joining us today.
You're
Tom,
welcome.
you have, especially for everybody attending today as well, you are running a couple of master classes, and I think a vetting one is coming up. Please share with us, guys. I have bent Shaun's arm to the back and around again to give us this amazing application best practice screening course for 500 Rand. I think it usually costs so much more. So please don't miss out on it.
Elise,
Yes. What did I do wrong?
no, you're not. Can you just hold on a minute? I've just shared the link.
Yes.
This is next Friday, which is our complete rental application and tenant vetting course, together with all the supporting documentation, etc. You weren't sure how you bent my arm. How you bent my arm was that if you buy this it's $4.99 a person, okay? It's a 2-hour session next week, Friday. If you buy today, Elise bent my arm so that today, this is the normal price. Let me just go there. If you use the coupon code today, only today, I'm going to say that again, today, because I've set it to expire at midnight. If you use Xpello as the coupon code, oh, what? I don't know why. Okay, so wait, let me just update the basket quickly. One is $4.99. If you use Xpello, but you have to spell it right now. That's the other trick.
Please, no E in front of the egg.
Then you will see that you will get a 25% discount. So you will get it for this per person.
Wow.
But that coupon code is only available for today. So I have shared the link. I think I did. I'm not like Elise.
Thank you very
yes,
much.
well, CPD points, certificate of completion, yes, while CPD points last. I believe in the new dispensation at own work. Oh, Rachel, how are you? Rachel was on our first ever, almost last in-person masterclass last year, so she knows what she's talking about. Hello, how are you? So yes.
Oh, good, thanks, Shaun.
Good, and I know David is busy working through our. I see he says he's going on to day 3 today of the boot camp recordings. By the way, if you want to, if you go to that link and you want to, you can also today's the very last day. This is also available. You can get the recording of the online virtual boot camps, which of course is me and Elise doing our twin set. But then we also have Bruno Samau in talking about mandates. We have Ismail Mohammed and Bruno in talking about breaches of lease agreements. We have Miguel Martins talking about the rental market. We have Chanel Kutsia from TPN. We have
Shaun,
the people
can
from
I ask
you.
Can I ask you to drop the link in there? So please go look at his website.
The link for what?
To your website. So they can see all your trainings, everything that you're offering.
Oh, the recordings.
Well, anything that you guys listen, I know everybody's always busy and you can't always.
Now I'll tell you what you do. I'll tell you what I will drop in there. I'm going to drop in the join the mailing list one.
That's also good. So
that's probably the best.
Shaun, you're still sharing your screen. So just before you type in passwords, right?
No, don't worry. My passwords are
Yes,
all hidden. No, I'm not going to log in. I just want to make sure that I remember that. Yeah, okay. I just want to make sure. Mailing list.
So you guys can join the mailing list. And what we'll do is, Shaun, we will share this session this morning. The link, it will be made available before the end of the week. So if there's any other questions, please send it to us. Please really go have a look at the sessions. It's always it's amazing for me to have somebody with these expertise on the session. And then again, please, people in Edenvale, please join us for the training on the 19th of July. If you want to come and have fun and just relax for 30 minutes and market your company, please join us on Mandela Day. Shaun, thank you again. I just want to see
you're welcome.
Thank you for
Please,
sharing everything with us and the discounts and your experience. We appreciate it.
I haven't had a ching ching yet. You're going to miss out on your discount.
And that's Shaun selling it like it is. Guys, he's also
The
got
longer I'm
amazing.
in this business, the easier it gets to sell.
You guys need your checklist as well. Go have a look at it. Thank you very much for everybody's time participating in the polls. It was quite interesting to say that most people would prefer not outsourcing vetting, and I understand why. That makes absolutely sense. And it seems that 450 is most people say that is a reasonable amount to charge for it. So that's interesting. Thank you very much for taking part in the poll. We really appreciate it. Everyone keep safe, stay warm, enjoy July. I think it's an amazing month, and please look out for our mailing list. Save xpello.co.za as part of your mailing list, that we don't go into junk. You guys are missing out on amazing information. So please, just one of those things, Elise at Xpello.co.za, please save us that I don't go into junk, because all our emails will come from my email address. Have an absolute fantastic day. Stay safe, stay warm, and thank you very much.
And enjoy KZN, Elise. Have fun.
I will. Thank you very
Okay,
much.
dokes.
Bye.
Bye.